The wind screamed through the canyon like something dying. Snow fell thick enough to blind a man at 20 paces. The small cabin of Brennan Ranch sat alone in the darkness, a single window glowing orange against the white void. Inside, Callan Brennan lay on the rough rope bed, his body burning with fever. Each breath rattled in his chest like stones in a tin can. The smell of sickness hung heavy in the air, mixing with smoke from the failing fire and the metallic tang of blood. Cordelia knelt beside him, her hands steady even as they trembled. A wet cloth pressed against his forehead. Steam rose from the basin beside her, ghosting in the cold air that leaked through every crack in the walls. 9 months. That's how long she'd been here. 9 months since she'd stepped off that train in Red Creek with nothing but a worn carpet bag and 3 letters from a man she'd never met. 9 months since Callan Brennan had stood in the snow and promised to keep his dead brother's word. Cora, his voice came out as a whisper, barely human. His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers ice cold despite the fever. If I don't make it through this night, the ranch is yours. Papers are in the iron box. Al knows where. She pressed her palm against his mouth, gentle but firm. Stop talking. Her voice carried the weight of exhaustion and something fiercer. I didn't travel 2,000 miles to listen to you speak nonsense. Outside, something moved in the snow. Not the wind. Footsteps. Horses stamping, nervous. The creak of leather and the soft click of metal on metal. Alistair MacLeod appeared in the doorway, shotgun cradled in his arms like a child. His Scottish accent thickened in moments of danger the way it always did. They're here, Cobb and his men. He knows Callan's down. Cordelia didn't turn from her husband, didn't flinch. She reached up without looking and pulled the Winchester from its place above the bed. The rifle was heavy, familiar. She'd learned to shoot it 3 months ago, standing in the yard while Al barked instructions in his rolling brogue. Then stop them. Her words came out flat, certain. I won't let anyone take this place. The rifle felt right in her hands, like truth, like promise. 9 months ago, she'd been a stranger. A woman with nothing running from a past she couldn't change. Now she was Cordelia Brennan, and she'd learned something in these Montana mountains. Some things were worth fighting for. The shadows outside moved closer. Cobb's voice carried on the wind, full of false concern and real menace. And in the cabin by firelight and fever, a woman who'd once been afraid chose not to be. Not anymore. Not ever again. 9 months earlier, the afternoon light over Red Creek Station had that peculiar quality of winter in Montana territory. Pale, thin, the kind of light that promised nothing and took everything. Cordelia Ashford sat on a wooden shipping crate beside the platform, her back straight, despite 6 hours of waiting. Her dark blue traveling dress was covered in a fine layer of railroad dust, the hem stained with mud from the journey. Black gloves worn thin at the fingertips were folded precisely in her lap. She counted time by the station master's pocket watch. He checked it every 17 minutes. She knew because she'd been counting for 6 hours. Click, the brass case opened. Tick, tick, tick. The mechanism's heartbeat steady and uncaring. Click. The case snapped shut. 6 hours and 14 minutes since the 3:40 train from Cheyenne had pulled away in a cloud of black smoke and broken promises. The platform was empty now. The other passengers had scattered to the boarding houses and hotels, to the saloons and the general store. The family with 4 tow-headed children. The 2 drummers with their sample cases. The old woman in black met by a younger woman in gray. Everyone had somewhere to go, someone waiting. Everyone except Cordelia. The station master's name was Herbert Miller. She knew this because a brass nameplate sat on his desk, visible through the wavy glass window. He'd come out twice to speak with her, once at 4 o'clock, once at 5:30. Now at 6:47, he came out again. Miss, his voice carried that particular kindness that made things worse. It's getting dark. Mrs. Fletcher runs a respectable boarding house just 2 blocks south. Very reasonable rates. Cordelia kept her eyes on the horizon where the mountains met the sky. Somewhere out there beyond the sage and snow was a ranch. A man who'd written 3 letters. A promise of work, of shelter, of something that might become a life. They'll come. Her voice was steady, which was its own kind of lie. Mr. Brennan said he'd meet the train. Herbert shifted his weight. She heard the creak of his boots, the small sigh he tried to hide. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of wood smoke and coming snow. Miss Ashford, I don't mean to pry, but... Then don't. The words came out sharper than she intended. Herbert's face reddened. He touched the brim of his hat and went back inside. Cordelia sat very still. She'd learned over the years that stillness was a kind of armor. If you didn't move, didn't react, people couldn't see how afraid you were. And she was afraid. 3 letters. That's what she had. 3 letters from Silas Brennan, Rancher, Montana Territory. The paper had been cheap but clean. The handwriting careful, the words honest, in a way that city men's words never were. Dear Miss Ashford, I am a rancher of modest means in the territory of Montana. I seek a woman of strong character and willing hands. The work is hard, but the land is fair. If you are of moral standing and Christian faith, I would be honored to make you my wife. The second letter had been warmer. Asked about her family, her education, her hopes. She'd answered truthfully. Orphaned by fever at 16, teacher for 6 years in a one-room schoolhouse outside Philadelphia. No family to speak of, no prospects. The third letter had included a photograph. A man beside a horse, both of them looking tired but honest. Dark hair, strong jaw, eyes that didn't smile but didn't lie either. On the back, in that same careful hand, Silas Brennan, age 24, Brennan Ranch, and a pressed wildflower. Indian paintbrush, red as blood, brittle with time. She'd looked at that flower every day for 3 weeks as she traveled west. Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh to Chicago, Chicago to Cheyenne, Cheyenne to here. Red Creek, Montana Territory. Population 247, elevation 4,800 feet. Temperature today, 28 degrees and falling. The flower was still in her reticule, wrapped in a handkerchief. She didn't take it out. Some things once broken couldn't be mended. The sky had gone from pale blue to gray to a darker gray that promised night. The temperature dropped with the light. Cordelia's breath came out in white clouds. Her feet had gone numb inside her boots an hour ago. The station master's watch clicked open, clicked shut. 7 o'clock. The door to the station house opened again. Herbert stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the yellow lamplight behind him. Miss Ashford. He didn't come outside this time. I've just received a telegram. It's regarding Mr. Silas Brennan. The world went very quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Cordelia stood. Her legs had stiffened from sitting. Blood rushed back into her feet, pins and needles, but she didn't stumble. She walked to the door with her head high and her hands steady. Herbert held out a yellow paper. Western Union. The words were short, brutal in their brevity. Silas Brennan, stop pneumonia, Laramie, stop brother coming, stop apologize, delay, stop. She read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. I'm sorry, miss. Herbert's voice came from very far away. The wire came from Laramie. Sounds like young Mr. Brennan took sick on his way to meet you. His brother will be along as soon as he's able, but... How long? Cordelia folded the telegram precisely in half, then in half again. How long ago did this wire arrive? About 2 hours back. I wanted to be sure before I... 2 hours. She looked past Herbert into the warm station house. At the telegraph key sitting silent on the desk. At the stove with its belly full of coal. At the clock that showed 7:03. 2 hours he'd known, while she'd sat in the cold, while the sun had set, while her last thread of hope had frayed to nothing. Thank you for telling me. Her voice was perfectly calm. I'll need directions to Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. She walked back to her carpet bag, where it sat beside the shipping crate, lifted it. The bag was heavy with everything she owned. 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, a Bible her mother had given her, a small wooden box containing letters from students, a cameo brooch, and $17 in bills. Everything she owned in the world could fit in one worn leather bag. The boarding house was exactly 2 blocks south, just as Herbert had said, white clapboard with green shutters and a porch that sagged in the middle. A sign hung by the door, Mrs. Fletcher's respectable lodging for ladies. $2 per night, $10 per week, no men allowed. Cordelia stood on the street and looked at that sign for a long moment. $2 per night, $17 in her purse. 8 nights, maybe 9 if Mrs. Fletcher was generous with the portions. And then the door opened. A woman appeared, round-faced and suspicious. Mrs. Fletcher, presumably. You'll be wanting a room. Not a question, an assessment. $2 paid in advance. Supper's at 6, you've missed it. I understand. Cordelia reached for her reticule. You're the one from the train, the mail-order bride. Mrs. Fletcher's mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. Heard about young Brennan. Shame that. Pneumonia takes them fast. Cordelia's hand froze on the clasp of her bag. He's dead. What? No, no, sick is all. Laramie doctors got him, but sick enough he couldn't travel. That's what I heard anyway. Mrs. Fletcher stepped aside. Well, come in then. Can't stand here heating the whole territory. The room was small, clean, a narrow bed with a worn quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, a window that looked out on nothing but darkness. Cordelia set her bag on the floor, sat on the bed. The rope supports creaked under her weight. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury for people who had the right to hope. She sat very still in the darkness and counted her options. $17, minus 2 for tonight. 15. A train ticket back to Philadelphia cost $42. She checked before she left. She could wire her cousin Martha, ask for money, accept the shame of crawling back, of admitting she'd been foolish enough to answer a stranger's advertisement, and travel 2,000 miles on the strength of 3 letters and a dried flower. Martha would take her in. Of course she would. Family duty demanded it, and Cordelia would live in Martha's spare bedroom and teach Martha's children their letters and eat Martha's charity for the rest of her life. Or she could stay. Use her $15 to survive until Silas Brennan recovered. If he recovered, and if he didn't. If he died in that Laramie hospital, leaving her stranded in a town of 247 souls, none of whom knew her name. Cordelia lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Water stains made patterns in the plaster. A map of nowhere. A future written in mold and time. She closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. The knock on her door came at 8 the next morning. Sharp, decisive. Cordelia had been awake since first light, sitting by the window and watching the sun rise over the mountains. It was a violent sunrise, all reds and golds, the kind that looked like the sky was bleeding. Miss Ashford, Mrs. Fletcher's voice through the door. You've a visitor. Says he's Brennan's brother. Cordelia's heart kicked once hard. She stood, smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Pale, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look older than 32. But clean, respectable, a woman who could be trusted. She opened the door. Mrs. Fletcher stood in the hall, and behind her, a man, tall, taller than the photograph of Silas had suggested, broader in the shoulders. He wore a heavy canvas coat over a chambray shirt, denim trousers tucked into work boots that were scuffed white with salt and wear. His hat was in his hands, dark hair pressed flat where the brim had been. His face was weathered in a way that spoke of years in the sun and wind. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against the tan skin. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the dim hallway light. He looked nothing like the young man in the photograph. Miss Ashford. His voice was low, roughened by cold or disuse. I'm Callan Brennan, Silas's brother. Cordelia nodded once. Mr. Brennan. They stood looking at each other for a moment. Mrs. Fletcher made a small sound of impatience. Well, I'll leave you to it. Parlor's downstairs if you need to talk proper. She left. Her footsteps on the stairs were loud in the silence. Callan Brennan shifted his weight. The floorboards creaked. He was a big man, broad and solid in a way that made the narrow hallway feel smaller. I came as soon as I could. He spoke slowly, choosing words with care. Got the wire yesterday evening. Rode through the night. How is your brother? Not good. No hedging, no softening, just truth. Just pneumonia. The doctor in Laramie says it could go either way. Cordelia absorbed this, filed it away. I see. I'm sorry. Callan's hands tightened on the brim of his hat. Silas wrote to you, made promises. He meant every word, but he's dying. Cordelia kept her voice level. And those promises died with him. He's not dead yet. Yet. Callan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumped beneath the scar. No, he said quietly. Not yet. The silence stretched between them. Downstairs, someone was clattering dishes in the kitchen. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted up, making Cordelia's stomach clench with hunger. She'd skipped supper, skipped breakfast. $15 didn't stretch far when you counted every meal. Miss Ashford. Callan looked down at his hat, then back up at her. Silas made you a promise. Letters and photographs and talk of marriage. You came 2,000 miles on his word. I did. That word still stands, if you'll have it. Cordelia frowned. I don't understand. The ranch. Callan met her eyes steady and serious. It's mine now. Mine and Silas's together, but Silas can't work it. Can't even stand up last I heard. And if he stopped, swallowed. When Silas wrote to you, he promised work, shelter, an honest arrangement. That promise came from our family, our name, and I mean to keep it. You're offering me charity. I'm offering you exactly what Silas offered. Work for wages, room and board, an honest exchange. And when your brother recovers, Callan's face showed nothing. Then he'll decide what he wants. If he wants to marry you, that's between you and him. If he doesn't, you'll have earned enough to go wherever you choose. Cordelia studied him, looking for the lie, the trap, the thing that would turn this offer into something ugly. She'd learned to look for those things. Pennsylvania had taught her well, but Callan Brennan's face showed nothing but exhaustion and a kind of grim determination. This was a man keeping a promise he hadn't made, honoring a debt he didn't owe. What kind of work, she asked. Cooking, washing, mending, tending the kitchen garden come spring, whatever needs doing around the place. He paused. It's not easy work, Miss Ashford. The ranch is small, we're short-handed, winter's coming on hard, you'd be working from sunup to past dark most days. I'm not afraid of work. I can see that. His eyes flicked to her hands, to the calluses visible even through the worn gloves. But this is Montana. It's not Philadelphia. I know where I am, Mr. Brennan. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. I expect you do. He turned the hat in his hands once more. I've got a wagon outside. It's a 2-hour drive to the ranch. If you're coming, we should leave soon. Storm's moving in. Cordelia looked past him to the window at the end of the hall. The sky had gone from blue to gray while they'd been talking. Heavy clouds sat on the mountains like a lid on a pot. I need to settle my account with Mrs. Fletcher. Already done. Callan's voice was gruff. Paid for last night and this morning. You don't owe her anything. Cordelia's back stiffened. I don't take charity, Mr. Brennan. It's not charity, it's payment in advance for work you'll do. He met her eyes. You can argue if you want, but the storm won't wait, and I'd rather not drive through a blizzard if I can help it. She wanted to argue. Pride demanded it, but pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. I'll get my bag. 10 minutes later, Cordelia sat on the hard bench of a farm wagon, her carpet bag wedged between her feet. Callan Brennan sat beside her close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, but carefully maintaining that inch of distance. The wagon pulled away from Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, away from Red Creek with its 247 souls. They settled into a steady walk. The wagon was a sturdy, well-built vehicle, its wheels turning smoothly as it moved along the path. The horses were matched chestnuts, strong and well cared for. Their breath steamed in the cold air as they settled into a steady walk. The wagon wheels crunched on the frozen ground. Callan didn't speak. He drove with easy competence, hands loose on the reins, eyes on the road. Cordelia sat very straight and watched Montana territory unfold around her. It was nothing like Pennsylvania, nothing like anywhere she'd ever been. The land here was vast in a way that made her chest tight. Rolling hills covered in silver-green grass and broken by outcroppings of red rock that looked like broken teeth. The sky went on forever, so blue it hurt to look at directly. No trees, no gentle eastern forests, just space and silence and a wind that never stopped. An hour passed, then another. The temperature dropped as they climbed higher into the mountains. Cordelia's hands were numb inside her gloves. Her feet had lost all feeling inside her boots. Callan glanced at her once. She saw him notice the way she tucked her hands under her arms for warmth. He said nothing, just reached behind the seat and pulled out a heavy wool blanket, handing it to her without a word. Cordelia took it, wrapped it around her shoulders. Thank you. He nodded, went back to driving. The silence sat between them like a third passenger. Not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy with all the things they weren't saying. Finally, Cordelia spoke. How long have you been at the ranch, Mr. Brennan? All my life. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. My father homesteaded it in '68, died 5 years back, left it to me and Silas together. I'm sorry for your loss, he shrugged. It was a while ago. More silence, the wagon creaked. The horse's hooves made soft thuds on the packed earth. And your mother, Cordelia asked, died when I was 12. Fever. He didn't elaborate. Cordelia understood. Fever had taken her own parents. Scarlet fever that swept through their town like fire, taking the young and old and leaving the rest to bury them. She'd been 16, old enough to know she was alone, young enough to still believe it might get better. It hadn't. Silas said in his letters that you're a teacher. Callan's voice pulled her back to the present. Was a teacher. 6 years at a schoolhouse outside Philadelphia. Why'd you leave? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Cordelia looked out at the mountains, at the empty land and the wide sky, and the space where a person could disappear if they wanted to. I had my reasons. Callan nodded slowly. I expect you did. He didn't press, didn't pry, just accepted her words and let the silence return. They drove on. The ranch appeared suddenly coming into view as they crested a rise. Cordelia's first thought was, it's smaller than I expected. A cabin. One-story log construction with a stone chimney, maybe 20 feet on a side if that. The roof was wood shingles, some newer than others where repairs had been made. One window in the front covered with oiled paper rather than glass. Beside the cabin sat a barn larger than the house. Beyond that, a chicken coop, a small shed, and what looked like a root cellar built into the hillside. A well with a stone rim sat between the cabin and the barn. No fence around the yard, no trees, just the building standing alone against the endless sky. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Callan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin, set the brake, wrapped the reins around the handle. Home, he said simply. A man emerged from the barn, older, maybe 52, with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of Scottish ancestry. He wore canvas trousers and a heavy wool sweater, a pipe clenched between his teeth. He looked at Cordelia, looked at Callan, raised one eyebrow. This would be the last, then. His accent was thick rolling. Glasgow maybe, or Edinburgh, somewhere that still remembered the old country. Miss Cordelia Ashford, Callan said. This is Alistair MacLeod. He's been with the ranch since my father's time. Call me Al, miss. The older man touched the brim of his cap. Welcome to Brennan Ranch. Thank you, Mr. MacLeod. Just Al. He took the pipe from his mouth, knocked it against his boot heel. Callan letter came from Laramie this morning. About Silas. Callan's face went very still. And, not good news. Doctor says the fever's worse. Lungs are filling up. He's asking if you want to come down in case... I can't. Callan's voice was flat. Final. Storm's coming. Stock needs tending. I can't leave. Al nodded slowly. Yeah, I reckoned you'd say that. Cordelia watched this exchange in silence. Watched the way Callan's hands tightened on the wagon seat. The way his jaw clenched. The way he didn't look at either of them. His brother was dying, and he couldn't go to him because of her, because he'd ridden through the night to keep a promise to a stranger. The guilt sat heavy in her chest, but she said nothing. What was there to say? Callan climbed down from the wagon, moving stiffly. 2 hours in the cold had settled into his joints. He came around to Cordelia's side, offered his hand to help her down. She took it. His hand was large, callous, strong. He steadied her as she stepped onto the frozen ground, her legs numb from sitting. The moment her feet were under her, he let go. I'll show you inside. His voice was carefully neutral. Can you see to the horses? Aye. The cabin door wasn't locked. Callan pushed it open and stepped aside to let Cordelia enter first. The interior was dim after the bright winter light outside. It took her eyes a moment to adjust. One room, maybe 15 feet square. A rope bed in the far corner, neatly made with a faded blue and white quilt. A table near the window with 2 chairs. A cast iron stove against the wall, cold now. Shelves holding tin plates, cups, basic supplies. On the wall above the bed, a single photograph in a simple frame. A woman, young, maybe 25, dark hair, pretty in a fragile way. She wore a high-collared dress and held a bouquet of wildflowers. Cordelia looked at the photograph, looked at the carefully made bed, The swept floor, the small touches that spoke of a woman's presence now gone. Sarah, Callan's voice was quiet. My wife, she died 18 months ago. Tuberculosis. Cordelia turned to face him. I'm sorry. So am I. He moved past her to the stove, began building a fire. You'll sleep here. Al and I bunk in the barn. There's a loft above the main room, plenty of space. Mr. Brennan, I can't take your home. It's not mine anymore. He struck a match, touched it to the kindling. Not really. It was Sarah's. Now it's yours for as long as you're here. That's not... It's how it is, Miss Ashford. He stood brushing his hands on his trousers. A woman doesn't sleep in a barn, not while I'm breathing. The fire caught small flames licking at the dry wood. Warmth began to seep into the cold room. Callan walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. There's food in the larder, not much, but enough. Coffee in the tin on the shelf. Al will bring in water from the well before dark. He looked back at her, his face unreadable in the dim light. Get some rest. We start early here, 4:30 most mornings. I'll be ready. He nodded once, stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Cordelia stood alone in the small cabin, in the home of a dead woman and a grieving man, in the middle of Montana territory with winter coming on and $15 in her purse and nowhere else in the world to go. She set her carpet bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the rope bed. The corn husk mattress rustled beneath her. The photograph of Sarah Brennan looked down at her from the wall. Cordelia looked back. I'm sorry, she said quietly, to Sarah, to herself, to no one. I didn't mean to take your place. But she had. That was the truth of it. She'd come west looking for a new life, and she'd found one. Just not the one she'd expected. Night fell fast in the mountains. One moment there was light, the next there was darkness, and stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. Cordelia had spent the afternoon making the cabin livable, sweeping the floor, washing the dishes, checking the larder, and finding it sparse but adequate. Beans, flour, salt pork, coffee, dried apples in a jar. She'd made coffee when Al brought the water, strong and black the way her father had liked it. The way she'd learned to drink it during the war when she'd been 11 years old and helping at the field hospital at Gettysburg, running messages between the surgeons and carrying water to dying boys who called for their mothers. That was a long time ago, a different life, a different Cordelia. She sat at the table now, the coffee gone cold in her cup, and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Callan and Al moving around in the barn, the soft sounds of horses, the creak of wood, the whistle of wind through the eaves. At 8 o'clock, she heard footsteps outside, heavy, uneven. She stood, moved to the window. Callan was at the well. She could see him in the moonlight, his shirt off despite the cold. He'd filled a bucket with water and was using it to wash the movements, mechanical and exhausted. His back was to her. She could see the scars there. Old ones, burns maybe, or injuries from the hard work of ranching. His right shoulder was swollen, the skin discolored even in the pale light. He was in pain, had been all day. She'd seen it in the way he moved, the careful way he'd climbed down from the wagon. Cordelia didn't think. She grabbed her shawl and went outside. The cold hit her like a fist. Her breath came out in white clouds. The ground was frozen hard under her boots. Callan heard her approach, turned. Water dripped from his face, freezing in his beard. Miss Ashford, you should be inside. You're hurt. She moved closer, her eyes on his shoulder. Your shoulder. I saw the way you were holding the reins. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Let me see. I'm fine. You're not fine, bah. Her voice sharpened. You're injured and you won't admit it because you're too stubborn. Now let me see or I'll get Mr. McLeod to hold you down while I look. For the first time since she'd met him, Callan Brennan looked surprised. Then slowly, something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. You've got spine, I'll give you that. I've got common sense. Sit down. He sat, on the edge of the well, bare-chested in the freezing night, looking up at her with something like amusement in his dark eyes. Cordelia moved behind him, placed her hands carefully on his shoulder. The injury was obvious now, a deep bruise, purple and black. The joint was swollen and inflamed, probably from a kick or a fall, the kind of thing that needed rest and care. The kind of thing a man like Callan Brennan would ignore until it got worse. When did this happen? 2 days ago, horse spooked threw me into a fence post. And you rode through the night to Red Creek? Not a question. Then drove a wagon for 2 hours. Had to. Cordelia pressed gently on the muscle feeling for brakes. The shoulder was intact, but the soft tissue damage was significant. Without proper care, it could take weeks to heal. During the war, she said quietly, I helped at a field hospital, Gettysburg in '63. I was 11, too young to do much, but I could carry water-hold bandages, steady run messages between the surgeons. Callan went very still under her hands. I learned how to recognize serious injuries, how to tell when a man needed immediate help. She moved her hands lower, checking the muscles. This needs rest. Heat compresses. And you had need to stop pretending you are not in pain. Can't rest. Too much work. Then let me help. You don't have to. I know. Her hand stilled on his shoulder. But that's my promise, Mr. Brennan. You kept your brother's word. I'll keep mine. Silence. Just the wind and the stars and the cold Montana night. Then quietly, Callan. She blinked. What? My name. It's Callan. He looked back at her, his face half in shadow. If we're going to be working together, might as well use names. Cordelia. She stepped back, suddenly aware of how close she'd been standing. Or Cora. Most people call me Cora. Cora. He said it slowly, testing the shape of it. Then he stood, reached for his shirt. Thank you for looking at the shoulder. You're welcome. He pulled on the shirt, buttoned it with stiff fingers, started toward the barn. Callan. He stopped, turned. Your brother, Cordelia said. Silas, if you need to go to Laramie, I can manage here. Al can show me what needs doing. Callan's face closed off again, became unreadable. No, he said quietly, the ranch needs me here. And Silas, his voice caught. Silas would understand. He walked away before she could respond, disappeared into the barn's dark mouth. Cordelia stood alone in the frozen yard. Above her, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent, eternal. She thought about promises, about the ones we keep and the ones we break, about duty and honor and the weight of words spoken to strangers. Callan Brennan had ridden through the night to keep his brother's promise to her. Now his brother was dying and he couldn't go to him. Because of honor, because of duty, because of her. Cordelia pulled her shawl tighter and went back inside. The cabin was warm now, the fire crackling in the stove. She banked it for the night, made sure it would burn till morning. Then she lay down on Sarah Brennan's bed under Sarah Brennan's quilt in Sarah Brennan's home. She didn't sleep, not for a long time, but she stayed. The first day Cora learned that Montana winter was a living thing. It had teeth. 4:30 in the morning came dark and cold. No gradual lightening of the sky, no gentle wake. Just the sudden awareness that she was awake, and the cabin was freezing, and somewhere outside Al was ringing the iron triangle that served as the ranch's only clock. She dressed in the darkness. Layers, everything she owned. The cold bit through the walls like they were made of paper. When she stepped outside, her breath froze in her lungs. The world was silver white with frost, every blade of grass stiff and sparkling under the stars. The mountains stood black against the slowly paling sky. Callan was at the barn, already moving between the stalls with a lantern. She could hear the horses stamping, smell the warm animal scent, mixing with hay and leather. Coffee's on the stove, he said without looking at her. Drink it hot. You'll need it. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint. Cora drank it anyway, feeling the heat spread through her chest like fire. Then the work began. Callan showed her where everything was. The feed bins, the water buckets, the chicken coop where 4 hens and an ancient rooster huddled against the cold. The root cellar dug into the hillside, smelling of earth and potatoes and onions. He spoke in short sentences. Showed once, didn't repeat. Wood needs to be dry. Wet wood smokes and won't burn. Chickens need feed every morning. Miss a day and they stop laying. Water freezes. Check it twice a day. Break the ice if you have to. Cora listened, remembered, made no complaints. By noon, her hands were raw despite the gloves. Her back ached from hauling water. Her feet were numb blocks of ice inside her boots. She made lunch from what she could find. Salt pork fried in a skillet, beans heated on the stove, bread that was more like hardtack but filled the belly. Callan and Al ate in silence, shoveling food like men who'd learned that meals were fuel, nothing more. When they were done, Callan stood. North fence needs mending. Be back before dark. He left. Al followed. The cabin fell silent except for the tick of cooling metal and the endless wind. Cora looked at the dishes, at the water that needed hauling, at the floor that needed sweeping, and the laundry that needed washing, and the 100 small tasks that made up a day. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The second week was harder than the first. Her body rebelled against the labor. Muscles she didn't know she had screamed in protest. Her hands cracked and bled despite the salve Al gave her. She woke each morning feeling like she'd been beaten. But she didn't complain, didn't ask for easier work, because she'd made a promise. And because every night when she counted her money, she counted her options too. $15, then 14, then 13. Each dollar spent on small necessities, a bar of soap, thread to mend her stockings, a tin of salve for her hands, each dollar bringing her closer to nothing. She needed this job, this place. She needed Callan Brennan to believe she was worth keeping. So she worked. She learned to split kindling without taking off a finger, learned to carry water buckets on a yoke across her shoulders because it was easier than making 2 trips, learned to coax fire from damp wood and make meals from almost nothing. She learned the sounds of the ranch, the way the wind changed pitch before a storm, the difference between a horse's contented whinny and one of distress, the particular creak the barn door made when Al was checking the stock at midnight. She learned Callan's rhythms too. He rose before dawn, worked until full dark, ate like a machine and slept like the dead. He spoke maybe 20 words a day, half of them to the horses. But she learned to read him anyway. The set of his shoulders when the work was going badly. The way he favored his right side when the old injury flared. The rare brief softening around his eyes when something went right. She learned that he checked on him, not obviously, just a glance through the cabin window when he passed. A pause at the well to make sure she wasn't struggling with the water. Small things, careful things, the acts of a man who'd learned to care quietly. The fourth week brought the first real storm. It came in fast from the north, turning the sky from blue to iron gray in the space of an hour. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The wind rose to a scream. Callan and Al worked frantically to get the stock secured. Cora helped where she could, running between cabin and barn with rope and tools and blankets for the horses. By the time they had everything battened down, the snow was falling so thick she could barely see the barn from the cabin door. Inside, Callan's voice was hoarse from shouting over the wind. All of us. Can't risk the barn tonight. They crowded into the small cabin, 3 people in a space meant for one. Al took the chair by the stovepipe clenched between his teeth. Callan stood by the window watching the storm. Cora made coffee, made more beans. It was all she had. They ate in silence while the wind tried to tear the roof off and the snow piled against the door. At some point, Al spoke. This'll blow through by morning, always does. Callan nodded, said nothing. More silence. Then Al looked at Cora, really looked at her. His eyes were sharp beneath the bushy gray eyebrows. You're different from Sarah. The words hung in the air. Callan went very still. Al, he said quietly, a warning. She was a good lass, Sarah. Soft, though. This land was too hard for her. Broke her before the sickness even got a chance. Al tamped his pipe, lit it with a coal from the stove. But you're made of tougher stuff. Cora didn't know what to say to that. I'm just doing what needs doing. Aye, that's my point. He puffed smoke. Sarah came here for love. You came for survival. Different reasons, different women. Callan turned from the window, his face unreadable. That's enough. Is it? Al met his eyes. You've been carrying that guilt like a stone for 18 months, thinking you failed her, thinking if you'd been different, done different, she'd still be here. Al, I swear. She was dying the day she arrived, lad. The consumption was in her already, we just didn't know it. You couldn't have saved her any more than you can save Silas now. The words fell like blows. Callan's face went white, then red. Get out. Callan. I said get out. His voice was deadly quiet. Go to the barn. I don't care about the storm. Get out of my house. Al stood slowly. He looked at Cora, something like apology in his eyes. Then he pulled on his coat and went out into the screaming white. The door slammed. The cabin shook. Callan stood very still by the window, his hands clenched into fists. His breathing was harsh in the sudden quiet. Cora sat at the table and waited. Long minutes passed, the storm raged, the fire crackled. Finally, Callan spoke. His voice was raw. He had no right. He cares about you. Cora kept her own voice steady. That gives him some right. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Doesn't he? Callan turned, looked at her with something wild in his eyes. Pain and anger and grief all mixed together. You don't understand. She was good, kind. She deserved better than this. He gestured at the cabin, at everything. Better than dying in this nowhere place with nothing but me and broken promises. Did she blame you? What? Before she died? Did she blame you for bringing her here? Callan's jaw worked. No, she said. His voice broke. She said it wasn't my fault. Said she'd been happy here, even if it was short. Then why are you carrying guilt for something she forgave? He had no answer for that, just stared at her like she'd spoken in a language he couldn't comprehend. Cora stood, moved to the stove, put more wood on the fire. I don't know what it's like to lose someone you love, she said quietly. My parents died when I was young. I barely remember them, but I know what it's like to carry weight that isn't yours. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed one to Callan. You kept your brother's promise to me. That was good. That was right. But you can't keep every promise for everyone. You can't save people who are already past saving. Callan took the cup. His hands were shaking slightly. Silas is dying. The words came out flat, final. The letters from Laramie get worse each week, and I'm here fixing fences and feeding stock and keeping a stranger alive while my brother dies alone. You're honoring his word. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Maybe not. Cora sipped her coffee, but it's what you can do. Sometimes that has to be enough. They stood together in the warm cabin while the storm tried to kill everything outside. 2 strangers learning to be something else, something that didn't have a name yet. When Cora finally lay down to sleep, Callan was still standing by the window, still watching the storm, still carrying his stone. The telegram came on a Tuesday morning in the 6th week. Cora was in the chicken coop when she heard the horse. She looked up to see a rider coming hard from the direction of town, snow flying from the horse's hooves. Her stomach clenched. Telegrams never brought good news. The rider was young, maybe 17. He handed the yellow envelope to Callan without dismounting. Sorry, Mr. Brennan. Mr. Miller said it was urgent. Callan took the telegram, stood looking at it for a long moment, his face carved from stone. The rider left. The sound of hoofbeats faded. Cora walked slowly across the yard. Al emerged from the barn, moving to stand beside Callan. Callan opened the envelope with careful precision. Read again. Then he folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Silas is dead. His voice was empty. Died yesterday morning, pneumonia. They buried him this afternoon. The words fell into the cold air and disappeared like smoke. Al removed his cap, held it over his heart. God rest him. Callan said nothing. Just stood there looking at something far away that no one else could see. Then he turned and walked into the house. Cora and Al exchanged glances. Al shook his head slightly. A warning, let him be. But Cora had never been good at leaving things alone. She found Callan sitting on the edge of the bed, the telegram in his hands. He wasn't crying, his face was dry, but something in his eyes was broken in a way that made her chest hurt. I should have gone. His voice was barely a whisper. Should have ridden to Laramie. Should have been there. You couldn't have saved him. I could have said goodbye. Cora sat beside him, not touching, just present. Tell me about him, about Silas. Callan looked at her, surprised. Tell me, she said again. I came here because of him. I should know who he was. So Callan talked, haltingly at first, then with more ease, about the brother who'd been too small and too weak for ranch work, but had tried anyway. Who'd loved books and poetry and things their father had no patience for. Who'd written those careful letters to a strange woman in Pennsylvania because he'd wanted his big brother to be happy again. He was good, Callan said finally. Better than me, kinder. He saw the best in people even when there wasn't any best to see. He saw something in me worth writing to. He did. Callan's hands tightened on the telegram. And now he's gone and you're here and I don't know what happens now. Cora took a breath, made a choice. I stay. Callan turned to look at her. What, I stay, if you'll have me. She met his eyes steadily, not because of obligation, not because Silas made a promise, because I choose to. Why would you choose this? He gestured around the small cabin. This life, this nowhere place. Because for the first time since I was 16 years old, I'm building something instead of just surviving. Her voice was firm. I look at this land and I see a future. That's something I never had before. Cora, I'm not asking for charity, I'm asking for work, for fair wages and a place to sleep and the chance to make something of myself. She paused. Unless you want me to go, in which case I'll pack my bag and be on the next train east. Callan was silent for a long moment. Outside, the wind whistled through the eaves. A horse whinnied in the barn. There's always work, he said finally, more than Al and I can handle alone. Then I'll stay. He nodded slowly. His hand moved, almost touched hers, then pulled back. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just pay me fair. That surprised a sound out of him. Not quite a laugh, but close. You've got spine Cordelia Ashford. Brennan, she corrected quietly. The letters came to Miss Brennan. Might as well use the name. Something changed in Callan's face. Softened. Cora Brennan, he said slowly, testing the shape of it. For now, anyway. They sat together in the quiet cabin. The weight of Silas's death hung heavy between them. But underneath it, something else was growing. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of trust. The first small root of something that might, given time and care, and the hard work of choosing each other day by day, become something more. Sunday came cold and clear. Callan drove them into Red Creek for church. It was Cora's first time back since the day she'd arrived. 6 weeks ago, though, it felt like years. The town looked different in the daylight. Smaller, more worn. The buildings leaned into each other like old men sharing secrets. Callan pulled the wagon up to the church. White clapboard with a simple steeple. A bell hung silent in the tower. People were gathered outside, families in their Sunday best. The women wore dresses in muted colors, shawls against the cold. The men stood in clusters, talking in low voices. The conversation stopped when Callan and Cora stepped down from the wagon. Cora felt the weight of their stares, felt the way they looked at her, then at Callan, then whispered to each other behind gloved hands. A plump woman in black approached, Mrs. Fletcher from the boarding house. Her face was arranged in what was probably meant to be sympathy, but looked more like satisfaction. Mr. Brennan, I heard about your brother. Such a tragedy. Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. And Miss Ashford, still at the ranch, I see. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. That must be difficult. A young woman alone with 2 men, so far from town. People do talk. Callan's jaw tightened. What people say is their concern, not mine. Of course, of course. I'm sure it's all very proper. Mrs. Fletcher's smile was thin. Still, appearances matter, don't you think? Before Callan could answer, a man stepped forward. Tall, well-dressed in a way that spoke of money. His face was handsome in a hard sort of way. Eyes pale blue and calculating. Brennan, the man's voice was smooth. Heard about Silas. My condolences. Cobb, Callan's voice went flat. Didn't know you attended church. A man's got to look after his soul. Ambrose Cobb smiled, showing too many teeth. This must be the young lady I've heard so much about. Miss Ashford, is it? It is. Cora kept her voice level. Came all this way to marry young Silas. Must be disappointed finding him gone. Cobb's eyes traveled over her slowly. Makes a person wonder what you're still doing here. The insult was subtle but clear. Cora felt heat rise in her face. Callan stepped between them. His voice dropped to something dangerous. Choose your next words carefully, Cobb. No offense meant, of course, just curious. A woman lives with 2 unmarried men. People wonder about the arrangement. Cobb's smile widened, especially when one of those men is trying to hold onto a ranch that's falling apart around him. My ranch is fine. Is it I heard your stock's down by half since winter started. Heard you lost the north pasture fence in the last storm. Heard you're so short on hands you've got a city woman hauling water and feeding chickens. Cobb paused. I could help with that. Make you an offer on the place. Fair price, enough for you to start fresh somewhere else. Not interested. You should be. Cobb's voice hardened. That lands more than you can handle, Brennan. You know it. I know it. Only question is whether you're going to admit it before you lose everything. He's not losing anything. Cora's voice cut through the tension. Clear, certain. The ranch is sound, the work is manageable, and I'm not going anywhere. Cobb looked at her with something like amusement. That right you planning to stay on help the grieving widower keep his little piece of dirt. I'm planning to honor the agreement I made, to work hard and earn my keep. She met his eyes without flinching. Whether that concerns you or anyone else is none of my business. For a moment, Cobb's mask slipped. Something cold and mean showed underneath. Then it was gone, replaced by that smooth smile. Well, I admire your loyalty, Miss Ashford, even if it's misplaced. He touched the brim of his hat. Brennan, you change your mind about my offer, you know where to find me. He walked away. Mrs. Fletcher and the other women followed, whispering. Callan stood very still, his hands clenched at his sides. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Do what? Defend me. Defend the ranch. I wasn't defending you. Cora smoothed her skirt. I was defending myself. I live there now. That makes it my business, too. Something flickered in Callan's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. Come on, he offered his arm. Service is starting. They walked into the church together. The congregation turned to stare. Whispers followed them down the aisle like a wake. Cora kept her head high, her hands steady on Callan's arm. Let them talk. Let them judge. She'd done nothing wrong. And if Ambrose Cobb thought he could intimidate her with veiled threats and social shame, he was about to learn different. The sermon was about Ruth, about a foreign woman who chose loyalty over comfort, who gleaned in fields not her own and found a home among strangers. Reverend Jeremiah Stone was an old man with kind eyes and a voice that carried despite his years. He looked at Cora twice during the sermon. Not unkindly, more like he was making a point. After the service, he sought them out. Mr. Brennan, Miss Ashford, a word. They stopped. The rest of the congregation flowed around them, still whispering. Stone looked at Cora directly. I understand you've been staying at the Brennan Ranch since your arrival. Yes, sir. And that Mr. Brennan and his foreman bunk in the barn to preserve propriety. Yes, sir. Stone nodded slowly. Then let me be the first to say, you are welcome in this church. Anyone who questions your character will have to answer to me. Cora felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you, Reverend. Thank the Lord, not me. He's the one who teaches us to judge, not lest we be judged. Stone smiled. Though I'll admit some folks need more reminding than others. They left Red Creek an hour later. The wagon ride home was quiet. Cora watched the landscape roll past. 6 weeks ago it had seemed alien, hostile. Now she knew the names of the distant peaks, could read the weather in the clouds, understood the rhythm of the seasons. This land was getting into her blood, whether she liked it or not. Cora, she turned. Callan was looking at her, something uncertain in his eyes. What Cobb said about the ranch, it's true mostly. I am short-handed. The work is hard. Winter took more stock than I wanted to lose. I know. You could leave. Go back east. Find something easier. I could. She pulled her shawl tighter against the wind. I'm not going to. Why not? Because I'm tired of running, tired of taking the easy path and ending up nowhere. She looked at him steadily. I told you before, I'm here to build something. That doesn't change just because the work is hard. Callan was quiet for a long moment. Then spring's coming. Few more weeks the snow will melt. We'll need to plant the garden, fix the fences, 100 other things. I'll help. I know you will. His hand moved on the reins. That's what worries me. Why? Because I'm starting to depend on it, on you. He didn't look at her. And I don't know what I'll do if you change your mind. Cora didn't answer right away. She watched the mountains, the endless sky, the hard, beautiful land that had become somehow something like home. I won't change my mind, she said finally. Not unless you want me to go. I don't. The words hung in the air between them. Simple, true. Not a declaration of love, not a proposal, just an honest admission from one person to another. It was enough. For now, it was enough. April came slowly. The snow didn't melt so much as retreat, leaving the ground muddy and uncertain. Cora and Callan worked side by side in the garden plot behind the cabin, turning soil, pulling dead growth from the previous year, planning where to plant what. Al had brought seeds from town: carrots, beans, squash, lettuce, small packages of potential wrapped in paper. Cora knelt in the dirt, her hands black with earth. She'd stopped wearing gloves weeks ago. The calluses were thick enough now that they didn't hurt. Callan worked beside her, turning the soil with a spade. His shoulder had healed mostly. He still favored it when the weather turned, but the pain was manageable. They worked in companionable silence. That was new. The silence used to be heavy, awkward. Now it was just part of the rhythm. Sarah planted roses here. Callan's voice broke the quiet. He pointed to the east corner of the garden. Right there. Got them from a catalog. Spent most of a month's egg money on them. Cora looked at the empty corner. What happened to them? Died that first winter after she passed. I couldn't. He stopped, swallowed. I couldn't tend them, and they weren't hardy enough to survive on their own. We could plant new ones if you wanted. Callan looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Would you want that? To tend another woman's roses? They wouldn't be hers. They'd be ours. Cora sat back on her heels. This place needs beauty, needs something that grows for buy instead of just survival. Roses are expensive, so we save. Plant them next spring. She smiled slightly. Gives us something to work toward. Callan nodded slowly. Yeah, okay, we'll save for roses. The word we between them. Comfortable now. Natural. They went back to work. An hour later, a rider came over the rise. Callan stood shading his eyes. Cobb. Cora looked up. Sure enough, Ambrose Cobb was riding toward them on a big bay horse. He looked prosperous and pleased with himself. He reined in at the garden fence, didn't dismount. Brennan, planting season already. Getting ready for it. Optimistic of you, considering. Cobb's eyes traveled over the ranch. I've been thinking about our conversation in town, about my offer. Still not interested. You should be. I've had surveyors look at the land. Water rights are solid, good grazing. With proper management, this could be prime property. He paused. I'm prepared to offer you $2,000 for the whole spread, buildings included. Cora's breath caught. $2,000 was a fortune. Callan's face showed nothing. No, that's more than fair, Brennan. More than you'd get from anyone else. I said no. Why pride bombing? Cobb leaned forward in the saddle. You can't work this place alone. Your brother's dead. You've got one old man and a woman who doesn't know a plow from a fence post. How long do you think you can last? Long enough. Winter's coming again. You barely made it through this one. Next one might kill you. Cobb's voice hardened. Take the offer while it's still on the table, because once I withdraw it, you won't get another one. Callan walked to the fence, looked up at Cobb with flat, cold eyes. Get off my land, and don't come back unless you're invited. For a moment, Cobb's mask slipped. His face went hard, dangerous. You're making a mistake. My mistake to make. Cobb wheeled his horse, paused, looked back at Cora. You ought to think about your future, Miss Ashford. Tying yourself to a sinking ship doesn't make you noble, just makes you foolish. He rode off, fast, angry. Cora stood, walked to where Callan stood at the fence, watching Cobb disappear over the rise. $2,000 is a lot of money, she said quietly. It is. You didn't even hesitate. No. Why not? Callan turned to look at her. His eyes were clear, certain. Because this land is mine. My father's before me. My blood and sweat are in every inch of it. He looked back at the cabin, the barn, the mountains beyond. I won't sell to a man like Cobb. Not for any price, Cora nodded, understanding settling into her bones. Then we'd better make sure we survive the next winter. She met his eyes. We. Callan's hand moved, caught hers, squeezed once. Then he let go and went back to work. But that single touch stayed with Cora long after the sun went down. Stayed with her as she made supper, as she washed dishes, as she lay in the darkness and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. They were building something, she and Callan, in this hard, beautiful land. She didn't know what it would become. Didn't know if it would last. But she knew she wanted to find out. And that was enough. Summer came to Montana like a promise kept. The snow retreated to the highest peaks. The frozen ground softened, turned to mud, then to earth again. Grass pushed up through the soil, silver green and new. The garden took root. Cora worked it every day, on her knees in the dirt, hands black with earth, pulling weeds and coaxing life from seeds that seemed impossibly small. Callan worked beside her when he could, which wasn't often. The ranch demanded everything. Fences to mend, stock to move, 100 tasks that couldn't wait. But there were moments. A Tuesday in June. They were repairing the north fence line, replacing posts that had rotted through the winter. The work was hard, repetitive. Drive the post tamp, the earth string the wire, again and again. Callan held the wire taut. Cora wrapped it around the post, twisted it to secure. Their hands touched, just for a second. Callan's rough fingers brushing against her wrist. They both went still. Then Callan pulled back. Cora finished wrapping the wire. Neither of them spoke. But something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed. Evenings became different after that. Callan started sitting on the porch in the hour before full dark. The rocking chair he'd repaired sat there facing west toward the mountains. He'd sit and watch the sunset, too tired to move, too restless to sleep. One night Cora came out with 2 cups of coffee, set one on the porch rail beside him, sat on the top step. They didn't talk, just sat together while the sky turned from gold to red to purple to black. While the stars came out one by one, then in clusters, then in such numbers, they looked like spilled milk across the darkness. It became a ritual. Every evening, weather permitting, coffee and silence and the slow turning of the sky. Al noticed, of course he did. The old Scotsman missed nothing. One morning he cornered Cora by the chicken coop. His eyes were knowing beneath the bushy eyebrows. "You're good for him." Cora scattered feed for the hens. "I'm just doing my job." "Aye, that's what you tell yourself." Al tamped his pipe. "But I've watched the lad for near 20 years. Haven't seen him this settled since before Sarah took sick." "I'm not Sarah. Thank the Lord for that." He struck a match, lit the tobacco. "Sarah was a good lass, but she was never happy here. Too soft for this country. It broke her heart before the consumption broke her body." Cora's hands stilled on the feed bucket. "But you," Al puffed smoke, "you're made for this place. Or it's making you. Hard to say which. What are you trying to tell me, Al? That Callan's falling for you, has been since the day you told off Ambrose Cobb in front of the whole congregation." He smiled around his pipe stem. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Cora didn't answer, couldn't answer, because she didn't know. Her birthday came on a Thursday in late June. She'd forgotten about it entirely until she found a package on the table at breakfast. Brown paper tied with string. No card. She opened it slowly. Inside a shawl, hand-knit from soft wool dyed a deep blue that matched the Montana sky. The work was careful, precise. Beautiful. Al was at the stove frying eggs. He didn't turn around. "Figured you needed something warmer than that threadbare thing you have been wearing." Cora held the shawl to her face. It smelled like lanolin and wood smoke and the particular scent of Al's pipe tobacco. "You made this?" "Aye. Wife taught me to knit before she passed. 40 years ago now. Still remember how." "It's beautiful. It's practical." But his ears were red. Cora wrapped the shawl around her shoulders. It was warm, soft, made with care by hands that knew loss and loneliness and the small kindnesses that made life bearable. "Thank you, Al." He waved a hand. "Eat your eggs before they get cold." That night, Callan found her on the porch. She was wearing the shawl, watching the stars. He sat in the rocking chair, didn't speak for a long while. Then 32 today. She looked at him, surprised. "How did you know?" "Al mentioned it." He was quiet again. "You're still young." "Not so young." "Younger than me." 1 year isn't much." "No, he rocked slowly. "I suppose not." More silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable anymore. "Cora," his voice was soft, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why did you really leave Philadelphia? Not the story about wanting something new, the real reason." Cora pulled the shawl tighter. She'd known this question would come eventually. "I was teaching at a girls' school, Good position, good wages. She watched a star arc across the sky and disappear. There was a man, doctor, respected. He used his position to take advantage of students, young girls who trusted him. Callan's rocking stopped. I found out, confronted him. He was powerful, well-connected. I was just a teacher. Her voice stayed level, but her hands clenched in the wool. He threatened to ruin me if I spoke, spread lies about me being unstable, improper. I could have fought him. Maybe won, maybe lost everything. So you ran. I chose to leave before he could destroy me. She turned to look at Callan. Does that make me a coward? No. His voice was firm, certain. It makes you smart, and it makes him a bastard who deserves worse than he got. Something loosened in Cora's chest. She'd carried that shame for months, the fear that she'd been wrong to run at the darkness. I don't judge people for at the darkness. I don't judge people for their past, only for what they do now. He paused. And what you've done here, the work you've put in, the way you've fought for this place like it's your own, that speaks louder than anything you left behind. His hand found hers in the darkness. Warm, solid, real. He didn't let go. They stood like that for a long time, not speaking, just being. It was enough. The fire came in August. Cora woke to the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke from the stove. Something sharper. Chemical. Wrong. She was up and out the door before she was fully awake. The barn was burning. Orange flames licked at the roof. Black smoke poured into the night sky. Inside, the horses screamed, "Fire!" Her voice tore out of her throat. "Fire!" Callan and Al burst from the barn's side door, faces black with soot. They ran for the corral, started opening gates. "Get water!" Callan's voice was hoarse. "Buckets, anything!" Cora ran, filled buckets at the well, ran them to the barn, threw water on flames that laughed at such small resistance. Again and again, her arms screamed, her lungs burned. She kept going. Al led horses out one by one. 3, 4. The animals were wild with fear-eyed, rolling white. Callan disappeared back inside for the 5th horse. Seconds passed. Too many seconds. Then he emerged pulling a terrified mare. His shirt was smoking. His hands were blistered. They got all 5 horses out, got them into the corral far from the flames. The barn burned for 2 hours before there was nothing left to burn. When the sun rose, all that remained was a blackened skeleton and ash. Callan stood in the ruins, his face unreadable. Al walked the perimeter, stopped, bent down. "Callan, come see this." Cora followed them. Al pointed to a spot near what had been the door. Dark stains in the ash. The chemical smell was stronger here, and something else, the charred remains of a rag half buried. "Kerosene." Al's voice was flat. "Someone set this." Callan's jaw clenched so hard Cora heard his teeth grind. "Cobb." "Can't prove it. Don't need to prove it. I know." Callan's hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. "He wants me gone, wants this land, and he'll burn me out to get it." He turned, started walking toward the cabin. "Where are you going?" Cora called. "To get my rifle. Then I'm riding to Cobb's place." "Callan, no. He burned my barn." The words exploded out of him. "Could have killed the horses. Could have killed you if the fire had spread to the cabin. This stops now." Al caught his arm. "Lad, think. You ride over there angry with a gun, someone dies. Maybe him, maybe you. Either way, you lose the ranch. I can't just let him. You can't prove it was him." Al's voice was gentle but firm. "And even if you could, killing him won't solve anything. It'll just give the law a reason to take everything you have." Callan stood rigid, every muscle locked with the need to act, to fight, to hurt the person who'd hurt him. Slowly, the tension bled out of him. His shoulders sagged. "Then what do I do?" "We rebuild." Al's hand was steady on his shoulder. "We survive. That's how we win." That afternoon, Callan rode to Cobb's ranch anyway. Without the rifle. Without Al. Cora watched him go, her stomach tight with worry. He came back 3 hours later, climbed down from his horse, moving like an old man. "What happened?" she asked. "I told him I knew what he'd done. Told him if anything else happened to my property, I'd come for him. Law or no law." Callan's voice was hollow. He smiled. Said he didn't know what I was talking about. Said these things happen on poorly managed ranches. Callan, he's going to keep coming, Cora. He wants this land, and he'll do whatever it takes to get it. He looked at her, something desperate in his eyes. I can't protect it alone. Can't protect you alone. Cora took a breath, made a decision that would change everything. Then marry me. Callan stared at her like she'd spoken in tongues. What? Marry me? She spoke clearly, deliberately. Not for love, not for romance, for survival, for the ranch. Cora, that's... Cobb is using your isolation against you. Single man, no family, struggling to hold on to too much land. It makes you vulnerable. She stepped closer. But if you have a wife, if you have family, the law protects you better. It makes you harder to push around. You can't possibly want to tie yourself to this. To me. I'm already tied to it. I've been working this ranch for 6 months. My sweat is in this soil just like yours. She held his gaze. I don't want to lose it any more than you do. Callan was silent for a long moment. The afternoon sun beat down. Somewhere a meadowlark sang, marriage is it's permanent, or it's supposed to be. I know. I can't promise you love. Can't promise you anything but hard work and harder winters and a life that might break you. I'm not asking for promises. Cora's voice was steady. I'm asking for partnership. For the right to stand beside you and fight for what we've built. What we've built, he said it slowly, tasting the words. Yes. He looked past her at the smoking ruins of the barn, at the cabin, at the garden where tomatoes were ripening and beans climbed the poles they'd set together. I love Sarah, he said quietly, but she's gone, has been for a long time, and I'm tired of living like a ghost. I'm not asking you to forget her. I know. He met her eyes. That's why I'm saying yes. The words hung in the air between them. Yes. Yes. A small smile touched his mouth. Let's get married, Cora Brennan. Let's make this legal and proper and give Ambrose Cobb something to choke on. Cora laughed. It came out shaky, surprised. When? Soon as Reverend Stone can do it. This Sunday if he's willing. This Sunday. She tested the timeline. 5 days. That's fast. You having second thoughts? No, she wasn't. That was the strange thing. She felt certain in a way she'd never felt about anything. No second thoughts. Callan's hand found hers, squeezed. Then it settled. Sunday came bright and clear, one of those perfect Montana mornings when the sky was so blue, it looked painted, and the air was so clean, it made your lungs ache. Cora wore her best dress, blue calico that Al had bought in town, carefully tailored to fit her in the evenings by lamplight. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and new in hers. Callan wore a black suit that had belonged to his father. Too loose at the waist, too tight at the shoulders. He'd shaved, cut his hair, looked uncomfortable and formal, and somehow younger. They drove to town in the wagon. Al came with them. He was the only witness they needed. The church was empty except for Reverend Stone. He'd agreed to the quick ceremony without question, his kind old eyes seeing more than he said. Dearly beloved, his voice echoed in the empty space. We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The words were familiar, traditional. Cora barely heard them. She was too focused on Callan's face, on the way his jaw was tight, the way his hands held hers like she might disappear. Do you, Callan Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Callan's voice was steady. I do. And do you, Cordelia Ashford, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Cora looked into Callan's eyes, saw something there that made her breath catch. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of love, the foundation for it. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Stone smiled. You may kiss your bride. Callan hesitated. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. Gentle, brief, a promise rather than a passion. When he pulled back, Cora saw that his eyes were wet. We did it, he whispered. We did. They signed the papers in the vestry. Cordelia Ashford became Cordelia Brennan in black ink and witness signatures. Al shook Callan's hand, kissed Cora's cheek. Congratulations, lass. You've just married the stubbornest man in Montana territory. I know. They drove home in the afternoon light. No celebration, no guests. Just the three of them and the knowledge that something fundamental had changed. When they reached the ranch, Al made himself scarce. Went to tend the horses even though they didn't need tending. Callan and Cora stood in the cabin. Alone. Married. The silence was heavy with expectation. I should... Callan gestured vaguely toward the door. The barn's gone, but I can sleep in the shed. Give you space. Don't. Cora's voice was quiet. We're married now. We can share a bed without shame. Cora, I don't expect... I know, she moved closer. But I don't want you sleeping in a shed. I want you here with me. He swallowed hard. Are you sure? I'm sure. That night they lay side by side in the rope bed. The corn husk mattress rustled with every movement. The quilt, Sarah's quilt, covered them both. Callan's hand found Cora's in the darkness. Their fingers intertwined. I'll try to be a good husband, he said quietly. I'll try to be a good wife. We'll figure it out as we go. Yes, he squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, they both slept peacefully. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Husband and wife in name and now in truth. They worked the land together, rebuilt the barn together with Al's help, and lumber bought on credit from the mill. The new structure rose slow but steady, each beam placed with care. Cora learned to read Callan's silences. Learned the difference between the quiet of contentment and the quiet of worry. Learned that sometimes the best way to help was simply to be present. Callan learned to lean on her, not just for work, but for the weight of decisions, for the burden of uncertainty, for the simple comfort of not being alone. The garden flourished under Cora's care. Tomatoes hung heavy on the vines, beans climbed their poles in green profusion. Squash sprawled across the tilled earth, their broad leaves catching the summer sun. In the evenings, they still sat on the porch, but now Callan sat in the rocking chair, and Cora sat beside him on a second chair he'd built. Their hands found each other in the twilight. A small gesture. Natural now. Al watched it all with satisfaction, smoking his pipe and saying nothing. Late August brought the first hint of autumn. The nights grew cooler. The leaves on the cottonwoods by the creek began to turn. And one morning, Cora woke feeling different. She lay very still, trying to identify the sensation. Not sick exactly, but changed. Aware of her body in a new way. It took her 3 days to be certain. Another week before she told Callan. They were mending fence on the south pasture. The work was almost meditative in its repetition. Drive tamp string, drive tamp string. Callan. He looked up from the post he was setting. I'm pregnant. His hands went still on the post. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he set down his tools, walked to where she stood, pulled her into his arms. You're sure? I'm sure. He held her tighter. She felt him tremble. Callan, are you all right? His voice broke. I'm terrified. So am I. What if something happens? Like with Sarah. Cora pulled back to look at him. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. I'm not Sarah, and this isn't that. She put his hand on her belly, still flat but not for long. I'm strong, healthy, and we'll get the doctor from town when the time comes. We'll do everything right. I can't lose you. The words came out raw. I can't. You won't. She didn't know if that was true. Childbirth was dangerous. Women died, babies died. But she said it anyway with all the certainty she could muster. You won't lose me. He kissed her then, not on the forehead, on the mouth, deep and desperate and full of every feeling he couldn't put into words. When they broke apart, they were both shaking. We're having a baby, Callan whispered. We're having a baby. And despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, they smiled. September turned to October. The leaves fell. The first frost came delicate and deadly, turning the world silver in the dawn. Cora's belly began to swell, just slightly, enough that she had to let out the waist of her dresses. The morning sickness came and went. Al started making ginger tea without being asked. Callan hovered protective and anxious. And then on a night when the first real snow had begun to fall, the riders came. Cora was tending the fire when she heard the horses, multiple sets of hoofbeats coming fast through the darkness. Her hand went to her belly, protective, instinctive. Then she grabbed the Winchester. Al appeared in the doorway, shotgun already in his hands. "Where's Callan?" "Checking the stock. He'll hear them coming." "How many?" "6, maybe 7. They spread out around the cabin, visible now in the light from the window. And in the center, sitting calm on his big bay horse, was Ambrose Cobb. "Evening, Mrs. Brennan," his voice carried through the closed door. "I've come to have that conversation with your husband about the future of this property." Cora moved to the window, saw Callan emerge from the shed where they'd been storing the last of the hay, saw him taking in the situation at a glance, saw him start walking toward the cabin. Unarmed, her heart clenched. But Callan's face was calm. He stopped 10 feet from Cobb's horse. "Say your piece, Cobb, then get off my land." "Still stubborn, I see, even after everything." Cobb gestured at the newly built barn. "Nice work. Be a shame if something happened to it." "You threatening me?" "Just making observations. Things happen on ranches. Fires, accidents. A man can lose everything if he's not careful." Callan's hands clenched, but his voice stayed level. "You've made your point. Now leave." "Not until we discuss terms. I'm prepared to raise my offer. 2,500, final price. Not for sale. Your wife might feel different, especially with a baby coming." Cobb's smile was thin, sharp. "Did you think I wouldn't hear small town? People talk. A pregnant woman out here miles from a doctor. What if something goes wrong? What if—" Callie moved, fast, grabbed Cobb's saddle and yanked him off the horse. Cobb hit the ground hard. Callan was on him before he could rise. "You listen to me." Callan's voice was deadly quiet. "You mention my wife again, threaten her again, even look at her wrong, I will kill you. Do you understand?" Cobb's men moved, hands on guns. Al's shotgun boomed, a warning shot into the air. "Next one's not a warning," the old Scotsman said calmly. Cobb scrambled to his feet. His face was red, furious. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Brennan." "No, you did. When you came to my home and threatened my family." "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. Because if you come back here, if you send your men, if anything happens to this ranch or anyone on it, I won't go to the sheriff. I'll come for you, and I won't come alone." Callan stepped back. His eyes never left Cobb's face. "Now get off my land, all of you." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Cobb remounted his horse. His men followed suit. "You'll regret this, Brennan." "Only thing I regret is not doing it sooner." They rode off into the darkness. The sound of hoofbeats faded. Callan stood very still, watching until he was certain they were gone. Then his knees buckled. Cora was there, catching him. Al helped her get him to the cabin. "I'm all right," but his hands were shaking. "I'm all right. You scared me half to death." "I know, I'm sorry." He looked up at her. "But I meant what I said. Nobody threatens you. Nobody." She kissed him, hard, then pulled back and hit him on the shoulder. "Don't ever do that again." "Do what?" "Go after a man with 6 armed riders backing him up." 7. Callan. "Sorry." But he was smiling, just a little. Al cleared his throat. "Hate to be the voice of reason, but Cobb's not going to let this go. He'll be back." "I know. So what do we do?" Callan looked at Cora, at the swell of her belly, at the cabin they'd defended together. "We get ready, stock up on ammunition, make sure the new barn's defendable, prepare for the worst." "And hope for the best?" Al asked. "No." Callan stood, pulling Cora up with him. "Hope's got nothing to do with it. We're going to fight, and we're going to win." October wore on. The snows came heavier. The cold settled in like it meant to stay. And true to Al's prediction, Cobb came back. Not with riders this time, with words. He spread rumors in town about Callan's temper, about the marriage being a fraud, about the ranch being mismanaged and dangerous. Some people listened. Mrs. Fletcher stopped nodding to Cora when they passed on the street, but others didn't. Reverend Stone preached about bearing false witness, made pointed eye contact with several congregation members as he did. The general store owner extended Callan's credit. Brennans have always been good for it. And slowly, quietly, other ranchers in the valley started making their positions known. Cobb was an outsider, didn't understand the unwritten rules of the territory. You didn't try to steal a man's land. You especially didn't threaten his pregnant wife. Early November brought the attack Callan had been dreading. Not from Cobb directly, but from three men in the night. Strangers, hired guns. They came quiet, would have gotten to the cabin if Al hadn't been awake. The old Scotsman's shout woke them. Callan grabbed his rifle. Cora grabbed hers. What followed was chaos. Gunfire in the darkness. Shouted warnings. The acrid smell of powder smoke. One of the men made it to the cabin door. Cora shot him through the shoulder. He went down screaming. Al wounded another. The third ran. When it was over, two men lay bleeding in the snow. The third was gone. Callan tied up the wounded ones, sent Al for the sheriff. The men talked. Names, dates, who hired them. Ambrose Cobb was arrested 3 days later. The trial was brief. The hired guns testified in exchange for lighter sentences. Cobb tried to claim innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. 5 years in the territorial prison. When the verdict was read, Cora was in the courtroom. 7 months pregnant, now belly swollen with new life. Cobb looked at her as the bailiff led him away. His face twisted with rage. But he was the one in chains, and she was free. Winter came hard that year. The snows were deep. The cold was bitter. But inside the cabin there was warmth. Callan had built an addition in the fall. A real bedroom. Space for a cradle. A future. Al spent the evenings carving. Small things. A rattle. A wooden horse. Tiny socks knitted from wool. And Cora grew. Round and full and uncomfortable. The baby came in late January. A boy. Dark-haired like his father. Strong lungs. The birth was hard. Cora labored for 16 hours. The doctor from town stayed the whole time along with the midwife. Callan paced in the other room, wore a path in the floorboards, prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. When the baby's cry finally came, he burst through the door. Cora lay pale and exhausted on the bed, but alive, smiling. "Come meet your son." Callan took the tiny bundle with shaking hands, looked down at the scrunched red face. "He's perfect." "He is." "What should we call him?" Cora didn't hesitate. "Silas. Silas Callan Brennan." Callan's eyes filled. "You sure?" "I'm sure. Your brother brought us together. He deserves to be remembered." And Callan kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "Hello, Silas. Welcome home." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought hope. The garden was planted, larger this time, more ambitious. The new barn stood solid and strong, better than the one Cobb had burned. And in the east corner of the garden, Callan and Cora planted roses. 3 bushes, hardy Montana stock that could survive the winters. "For Sarah," Cora said as they tamped the earth around the first plant. "For Sarah," Callan agreed, "and for us, and for him." He nodded toward where Al sat on the porch holding baby Silas and singing something in Gaelic. They worked in companionable silence. The sun was warm on their backs. The soil was rich and dark. "Cora, I love you." She looked up at him, smiled. "I know." "When did you know? That you loved me or that I loved you?" "Either. Both." She sat back on her heels, thought about it. "I think I started loving you the night you let Al back in after the storm, when you set aside your pride and your pain and chose forgiveness." She touched his face. "That's when I knew you were a good man. Not a perfect man, but a good one." "And when did you know I loved you?" "The day you proposed, not the real proposal, the fake one, when you asked me to marry you for the ranch." She laughed softly. "You thought you were being practical, but I saw your face. You wanted it to be real even then." "I did." He pulled her close, careful of her still healing body. "I really did." They finished planting the roses, watered them, said a small prayer that they'd take root. Then they went inside, to their home, their family, their life. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was good, and it was theirs. Epilogue. Autumn 1885. 1 year after the attack. The cabin had grown again. 2 rooms now, a proper bedroom. A small nursery where Silas slept in the cradle Al had made. The barn stood tall and proud. The garden was lush. And in the corner, Sarah's roses bloomed, deep red and fragrant, beautiful. Cordelia Brennan sat in the rocking chair on the porch nursing her son. He was 3 months old now, strong and healthy, loud when he was hungry, just like his father. Her hand rested on her belly, 2 months along with the second child. They'd been careful this time, hadn't told anyone yet except Al, but soon enough everyone would know. The Brennan family was growing. Callan came around the corner of the barn, tools in his hands, saw her, smiled that slow smile she loved. He set down the tools and climbed the porch steps, sat on the rail beside her chair. How is he home? Hungry, always hungry. Takes after me, she laughed. He does. Callan's hand covered hers where it rested on her belly. And this one? Fine, tired but fine. You should rest more. I'll rest when the work's done. The work's never done. Then I guess I won't rest. He kissed her, soft, sweet, full of love. The baby finished nursing. Cora shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back until he burped. What names are we thinking? Callan asked. For the new one. If it's a boy, Thomas, for your father. And if it's a girl, Cora smiled, Sarah, after your first wife. Callan's eyes grew wet. You don't have to. I want to. She loved you. She'd be happy you found love again. And our daughter should know there was another woman who helped make you the man you are. He kissed her again, deeper this time. When they broke apart, baby Silas was asleep on Cora's shoulder. The sun was setting. The sky turned gold and rose and purple. Al came out of the barn pipe in his mouth, saw them on the porch, smiled. Dinner'll be ready in an hour. I made that stew you like, Cora. Thank you, Al. And I picked up the mail in town. Letter for you, Callan. From the territorial governor. Callan took the envelope, opened it, read. His eyebrows rose. What is it? Cora asked. They're offering me a position, deputy land commissioner for the territory, settling disputes, helping new homesteaders get established. That's wonderful. It means traveling, being away from the ranch sometimes. Then I'll manage things here with Al's help. She shifted the baby. You fought hard for this land, for this life. If you can help others do the same, you should. Callan looked at the letter, at his wife, at his son. Let me think about it. Take your time. They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, then in clusters, then so many the sky was more light than dark. This was home. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. Built on hard work and harder choices. Built on trust and time, and the quiet promise to choose each other every day. Years later, when Cordelia Brennan was old, numb. Not years later. Now. Let the story end now. In this perfect moment, with a family on a porch, with stars overhead, with love earned through fire and fear in the simple act of showing up. With two people who started as strangers and became something more. Not because of fate, not because of destiny, but because they chose it. Every single day, they chose each other. And that, more than any grand gesture or passionate declaration, was love. The mountains stood eternal. The seasons turned. The land endured. And on Brennan Ranch, under the endless Montana sky, a family grew. Not from blood alone, but from choice, from promise, from love. This is where the story ends. Not with tragedy, not with loss, but with hope, with life. With the quiet certainty that some things, some people are worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a life around. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods. The baby stirred and settled. The stars wheeled overhead. And Cordelia Brennan, who had once been so alone, who had once had nothing but $17 and 3 letters from a stranger, Cordelia Brennan, who had traveled 2,000 miles on faith and fear. Cordelia Brennan, who had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. She looked at her husband, her son, her home, and she smiled, because she knew something now that she hadn't known a year ago. She knew that love wasn't something you found. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, in mud and sweat and the quiet promises kept in darkness. And that was better than any fairy tale. That was real. That was enough. That was everything.